The moment the question was asked, everything changed. Not later, not after the break. Right there, live on television, in front of the entire nation. Keir Starmer froze for just a second. But that second was enough. Enough for viewers to sense something was wrong. Enough for the confidence to drain from his voice. Enough for power to begin slipping away. Because this was not a hostile attack or a political stunt. This was a calm, direct question, backed by facts, clips, and his own past words. And as the silence stretched, Britain realised it was no longer watching a Prime Minister defending his position. It was watching a leader being cornered by the truth with no clear way out. Keir Starmer had built his public image on control, every sentence measured, every appearance rehearsed. For a long time, that strategy worked. Whenever controversy appeared, it was managed. Whenever criticism grew louder, it was redirected. The message was always calm, always disciplined, always firm. Supporters pointed to his professionalism. Critics complained he was distant, but no one doubted one thing. He knew how to stay on his feet until this moment. On that night, the studio felt different. The lights were the same. The format was the same. But the atmosphere carried an edge that could not be ignored. The presenter did not raise their voice or make accusations. Instead, they began by laying out a simple timeline, dates, public statements, parliamentary answers, all already on record, nothing secret, nothing hidden. The danger came from how cleanly everything was arranged. When words spoken years ago were played next to words spoken just weeks earlier, the cracks became impossible to deny. Starmer attempted to respond with confidence. He spoke about context, about changing circumstances, about misunderstandings. But the more he spoke, the more the gap widened between explanation and evidence. Each answer created another question. Each clarification exposed another inconsistency. This was not a single mistake. It was a pattern unfolding in front of millions. And once a pattern becomes visible, it becomes powerful. Viewers at home sensed it immediately. The rhythm of the interview changed. Long pauses replaced quick replies. His tone softened, then tightened, then drifted. He stopped looking directly into the camera. These small details mattered. In politics, presence is authority, and his presence was slipping away second by second. The audience did not need experts to explain what they were seeing. The discomfort was clear. What made the moment devastating was its simplicity. There was no shouting match, no dramatic accusation, just a request for explanation that never truly arrived. The presenter repeated the same question in different ways, calmly, patiently, and each time the answer failed to land. The nation was watching a leader struggle not with an opponent, but with his own record. Inside government buildings, alarms were already sounding. Advisors watching the broadcast knew the danger immediately. Once trust begins to fracture on live television, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Statements were drafted before the programme ended. Calls were placed. Senior figures were warned. This was no longer about reputation, it was about survival. As clips from the interview began circulating online, reactions spread faster than any official response could contain. People replayed the pauses, they highlighted the contradictions, they shared moments where answers faded into silence. This was no longer a political debate, it was a public judgment forming in real time. The authority that once protected him was dissolving under scrutiny. By the end of the interview, something fundamental had changed. The question was no longer whether the Prime Minister had made mistakes. The question had become whether he could continue at all, because leadership depends on trust. And that trust, once lost in front of a live audience, rarely returns. The moment the broadcast ended, the ripple effect began to spread throughout the political world. Westminster, usually a fortress of carefully controlled narratives and polished statements, suddenly felt like a house built on shifting sands. Inside the corridors of power, the mood shifted from cautious optimism to outright panic. The careful plans to steady the party and project strength were thrown into chaos as advisors scrambled to understand the scale of the damage. Phones rang non-stop. Whispered conversations became urgent meetings. The air buzzed with a single question. How could this have been allowed to happen live with no preparation or control? Political insiders revealed that what made the situation truly dangerous was not just the revelations themselves, but the manner in which they were revealed. Live, unfiltered, undeniable. The carefully maintained distance between the Prime Minister's office and the media was shattered in an instant. The opposition seized the moment, using the broadcast as a rallying cry. Statements demanding immediate accountability flooded press conferences and social media platforms alike. The phrase "leader in crisis" trended across networks. Calls for emergency sessions in Parliament echoed through the halls. Even members of Starmer's own party were forced to confront the growing reality. The position of their leader was no longer tenable. At the same time, analysts on news channels dissected every frame of the interview, every hesitation, every faltering word. They debated whether this was a crisis of leadership or simply a political storm that could be weathered with time. Yet the consensus grew darker as the night progressed. The cracks were no longer hidden under a veil of political rhetoric, they were glaring and wide. With public trust already fragile after months of economic uncertainty and political scandals, this latest blow threatened to push the government to breaking point. Meanwhile, social media erupted into a battleground of opinions, clips, and theories. The broadcast became viral, dissected by influencers, political commentators, and ordinary citizens alike. Memes mocking the Prime Minister's visible discomfort spread rapidly. Hashtags calling for his resignation trended worldwide. The immediacy of social media meant that every moment was analysed, reanalysed, and shared with increasing intensity. This was a different world than the one politicians once knew, one where control over the narrative could vanish in seconds. Back in the heart of government, the pressure mounted relentlessly. The Prime Minister's team began emergency damage control, drafting statements that promised transparency and future action. But these words felt hollow to many. The opposition's demand for immediate resignation grew louder, framing the issue not just as a political failure, but as a betrayal of the public trust. The growing chorus made clear that this was not a temporary setback, but a potential turning point in British politics. Yet despite the storm, Starmer's closest allies remained in a difficult position. Public support for the party was deeply fractured, and any sign of internal division risked deepening the crisis. Quiet conversations were reportedly taking place behind closed doors, like talks about how to protect the party, how to manage the fallout, and whether it was possible to salvage the Prime Minister's leadership. But the consensus was growing that something fundamental had shifted. The person who once stood for stability was now seen by many as a symbol of uncertainty and broken promises. As the hours passed, the atmosphere grew heavier. Each new report or leaked comment seemed to fan the flames. The media coverage shifted from questioning Starmer's policies to questioning his ability to lead at all. The idea that a political figure could lose public confidence so rapidly in an age of instant news and viral clips became a sobering reality for all politicians watching. No one was safe from the speed and power of modern media, especially not those at the very top. The government's attempts to regain control felt increasingly desperate. Official briefings were scheduled and cancelled. Spokespeople gave contradictory statements. Each new message was met with more scepticism than the last. The public mood, already restless, turned from concern to cynicism. It was clear that the political establishment was struggling to keep pace with the unfolding crisis, unable to provide the clarity and reassurance the nation demanded. In this turbulent atmosphere, the opposition gained ground, seizing the narrative with renewed energy. They framed the scandal not just as an individual failure, but as a broader indictment of government integrity and accountability. Parliamentary debates became heated, with calls for urgent inquiries and the establishment of committees to investigate the issues raised. The pressure was no longer behind closed doors. It was public, loud and relentless. As the nation watched this political drama unfold, questions multiplied. What would come next? Could Starmer hold on? Or was the era of his leadership truly over? In a country already divided and anxious, this moment deepened the uncertainty, leaving many to wonder what the future held for British politics. The fallout from the broadcast wasn't limited to Westminster corridors and television studios, but it spread quickly to every corner of the country. Ordinary citizens who had watched the interview began discussing the revelations with a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a deepening sense of betrayal. What made the situation so explosive was that these weren't distant political battles or abstract policy debates. They were questions about honesty, trust, and leadership at the highest level. Families gathered around dinner tables, offices buzzed with conversations, and social media feeds overflowed with heated debates. The Prime Minister's image, carefully maintained over years, was now being questioned everywhere. Political commentators echoed this shift. The narrative was no longer about Starmer's plans for the future or his party's direction. It was about his capacity to lead at all. Analysts noted how quickly public opinion was changing, pointing to polls that showed a significant drop in approval ratings overnight. This wasn't a slow decline, but a sharp plunge. A political freefall driven by a moment of televised truth. The prime question became whether Starmer could recover from this, or if his leadership was now irreparably damaged. Inside the party, tensions rose as members struggled to process the rapid developments. Loyalists faced difficult decisions: defend the leader despite growing evidence and public doubt, or begin positioning themselves for what appeared to be an inevitable transition. Sources close to the inner circle revealed a mix of anxiety and disbelief. Some were still hopeful that the crisis could be contained, while others accepted the reality that the party was entering a new, uncertain chapter. The pressure was mounting not only from outside but from within. Opposition parties sensed opportunity. They ramped up criticism and sharpened their attacks. The language used in Parliament and media was harsher, more direct and less forgiving. Demands for Starmer's resignation were no longer whispered but shouted. Press conferences turned into arenas of confrontation, where every misstep was seized upon and magnified. The political landscape shifted dramatically, with the Prime Minister losing ground not just with voters, but with political peers. Public protests and demonstrations began to appear in major cities. These gatherings reflected a range of emotions: anger at perceived dishonesty, frustration over political instability, and demands for greater transparency and accountability. Police reported increased activity around government buildings, and news outlets covered the unrest live. The country was no longer just watching politics from a distance. It was becoming part of a national crisis. Media outlets, both traditional and digital, played a crucial role in shaping the unfolding story. Investigative reports dug deeper into the facts raised during the broadcast, uncovering further details that painted a complicated picture. The media frenzy made it impossible for the government to control the narrative. Every day brought new headlines, new controversies, and new challenges. For Starmer, the pressure was relentless, with no room to regroup or recover. This period was marked by uncertainty and speculation. Political experts debated the timeline for potential leadership changes, the impact on upcoming elections, and the future of the party itself. Analysts warned that even if Starmer managed to stay in power for a time, the damage to public trust could have long-lasting effects. The scandal had become more than a moment. It was now a defining crisis that threatened to reshape British politics for years to come. As the storm continued, Starmer's public appearances grew fewer and more controlled. Each statement was scrutinised for signs of weakness, or resolve. Allies appeared in the media to defend him, but their words often felt rehearsed and insufficient. The leader, who once stood tall and confident, now seemed cautious, constrained by the weight of his predicament. The country watched closely, knowing that every move could signal the beginning of the end. As the political storm deepened, the mounting pressure on Keir Starmer reached a critical point. The carefully crafted facade of control and composure began to show signs of strain, not just on television, but in private conversations and internal meetings. The air inside Downing Street was thick with tension and uncertainty. Advisors and senior officials, once confident in their leader's resilience, now whispered fears that the crisis was spinning out of control. The resignation calls that had been murmured in corridors soon became loud demands. The country was witnessing a collapse of leadership unlike anything seen in recent memory. The moment that finally sealed Starmer's fate came during a brief but highly significant televised statement. Without the usual flourish or defiance, he acknowledged the growing unrest and controversy surrounding his leadership. His words were measured. his tone subdued, a stark contrast to the confident speeches that had marked his result. He spoke of responsibility, unity, and the need to prioritise the nation's well-being. But beneath the carefully chosen language was a message that was impossible to miss. The end of his tenure was near. This statement was both an attempt to regain control and an admission of defeat. Within minutes, the media outlets worldwide shifted their headlines from speculation to confirmation. The phrase forced resignation spread like wildfire, echoed by politicians, commentators, and the public alike. The narrative was clear. The Prime Minister was stepping down not out of choice, but because the weight of explosive revelations and lost trust left him no alternative. The resignation was not a fall from grace, but a collapse under the relentless pressure of truth. Behind the scenes, the political machinery swung into rapid action. Plans for succession were quietly drawn up, names whispered as potential replacements. Senior party members engaged in intense discussions about damage control, election strategy, and restoring public confidence. The vacuum created by Starmer's departure was not just a gap in leadership, it was a chasm threatening to engulf the party's future. The challenge was immense. To rebuild trust while navigating the fallout from one of the most public and dramatic political downfalls in recent British history. The public reaction to the resignation announcement was swift and divided. Supporters expressed shock and sadness, grappling with the sudden loss of a leader they had backed through turbulent times. Critics saw it as long overdue, a necessary step to restore integrity. But across the nation, a pervasive sense of uncertainty settled in. The speed and intensity of the collapse left many questioning the stability of the political system itself. The resignation raised profound questions about accountability, transparency, and the role of leadership in a democracy. Media coverage intensified with live analysis, expert panels, and public debates dominating airwaves. The story was no longer about the individual, but about the broader implications for the country. Commentators explored how a leader once seen as a symbol of hope could fall so rapidly. The discussion extended beyond politics into the fabric of British society, reflecting on trust, governance, and the fragile nature of power in the digital age. International observers also took note. Allies and rivals watched closely as Britain navigated the crisis, aware that political instability in one of the world's leading democracies could have far-reaching consequences. The global media spotlight added an extra layer of pressure, emphasising the significance of the moment, not just domestically, but on the world stage. As the dust began to settle, the focus shifted to what came next. The resignation was not just an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter fraught with challenges. Who would lead the party out of crisis? How would public trust be rebuilt? What lessons would be learnt from the rapid unravelling of a Prime Minister's tenure? These questions hung heavily in the air, shaping the political landscape for months to come. The shockwaves from Keir Starmer's resignation reverberated far beyond the walls of Parliament and government offices. Across the country, from bustling cities to quiet villages, people struggled to come to terms with the rapid unravelling of leadership they had once trusted. The news sparked conversations in homes, workplaces, and public spaces as citizens debated what this meant for the nation's future. For many, the resignation was more than a political event. It was a symbol of frustration with a system that seemed increasingly distant and disconnected from the realities people faced daily. Public opinion polls reflected this turbulence. Support for the ruling party took a sharp dive, while confidence in political institutions eroded further. Surveys showed growing disillusionment among voters, many of whom expressed cynicism about the promises politicians make and break. The rapid fall of a Prime Minister caught in live televised revelations became a powerful narrative about accountability, or the lack thereof, in modern politics. For some, it reinforced the belief that the political elite operated in a bubble, removed from the concerns of ordinary citizens. This period also saw a rise in grassroots movements and calls for reform. Citizens demanded greater transparency and honesty from their leaders, fueled by a sense that the truth had been hidden for too long. Public protests, town hall meetings, and social media campaigns emerged, all pressing for change. The resignation became a rallying point for those who sought to hold politicians accountable in new and meaningful ways. The energy was palpable, reflecting a desire not just for a new leader, but for a new political culture. Within the political sphere, reactions varied widely. Some former supporters of Starmer expressed deep disappointment and concern over the party's future. They worried about the impact on upcoming elections and the ability to unite a fractured electorate. Others saw the resignation as a necessary purge, an opportunity to rebuild and refocus the party's mission. Behind closed doors, debates raged over the direction the party should take, the qualities needed in the next leader, and strategies for regaining lost ground. Media coverage during this time was relentless. News outlets ran in-depth analyses, interviews, and special reports examining the factors that led to the downfall. Political commentators debated whether this was an isolated failure or part of a broader pattern of instability in modern governance. The resignation sparked a wave of opinion pieces exploring themes of leadership, trust, and the challenges of navigating politics in an era dominated by instant information and public scrutiny. International reactions added another layer of complexity. Allies expressed concern about the impact on Britain's role on the global stage, while rivals saw openings to challenge British influence. Diplomatic circles watched closely, anticipating shifts in policy and direction as new leadership emerged. The global significance of the resignation underscored the interconnectedness of modern politics and the far-reaching consequences of domestic crises. Amidst this turbulent environment, the question on everyone's mind was what came next. The party faced the daunting task of selecting a new leader capable of restoring confidence and steering the country through uncertain times. The public demanded clear answers and decisive action. The political establishment grappled with how to move forward without deepening divisions. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but also opportunities for renewal and change. For many, the resignation of Keir Starmer served as a stark reminder of the fragile nature of political power. It highlighted the importance of transparency, accountability, and connection with the people. It also underscored the transformative impact that media and public scrutiny now have on leadership. As the nation looked ahead, the legacy of this moment would shape political discourse and expectations for years to come. The aftermath of Keir Starmer's forced resignation marked the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter for British politics. What followed was a period of intense reflection, both within the party and across the nation. The leadership vacuum left behind was palpable, stirring questions not only about who would succeed him, but also about how the political system itself could regain the trust it had lost. The country faced challenges on multiple fronts: economic pressures, social divisions, and international uncertainties, all heightened by the dramatic collapse of a once promising leader.